Hi everyone, welcome to week 8 of your technical math course. This week we are moving on, still in kind of the area of geometry, so still working with figures, and moving on into trigonometry. Trigonometry basically has to do with measures of angles and things like that in relationship to figures. That's probably the easiest way to put it. So what we're going to look at first in chapter 13 is what we call right triangle trigonometry. And those of you who may have had geometry back in high school, you may remember some of the terminology that you're going to be hearing in this particular chapter. So first, let's look at what is trigonometry. There's actually 6 what we call trig functions of a right triangle. And it's all based on the sides and the angles and the relationships with each other. And so here's an example of a picture, and they're showing you an angle. So we're going to refer to this angle right here, and then they're going to talk about the side opposite that angle, the side adjacent to that angle, and the hypotenuse. So all of these are in relationship to this angle and the right angle. So this is only for a right triangle, and only in relationship to this angle. So as we talk about it, that's what we're going to be referring to. So it's always adjacent is always the angle or always the side next to the angle, and opposite is always the side across from it. Regardless of where it's all positioned, it's always going to be in reference to that particular angle. Now, as we go on and we look at these trig functions, you might notice something that seems a little familiar, and that's down here at the bottom. And that's something we refer to as SOHCAHTOA. And so that's just an easy way to try to remember some of the 3 common trig functions. So the 3 on top, sine, cosine, and tangent, are all represented with this acronym here, SOHCAHTOA. So what that means is the sine of the angle is equal to the opposite side over the hypotenuse. That's where the O and the H come from. The cosine is equal to adjacent over hypotenuse, and the tangent is equal to opposite over adjacent. So that's where that whole SOHCAHTOA comes from. So if you remember that from back in your high school years, that's what it's referring to. Now, these other 3 trig functions are the opposite of sine, cosine, and tangent. They're cosecant, secant, and cotangent. You're probably not going to run into those very often, but they are basically the opposite. So if you flip these upside down, you can see that cosecant is hypotenuse over opposite, and so on. So it's just the same one as the one that's below, flipped over. Okay. Now, the rest of my slides are going to go through and talk about how to actually find the trig ratios and then how to use those ratios to find missing pieces. Here's an example, and they're showing you all of these different ratios. Now, for example, if we're talking about this angle here, theta, if it's this angle, the opposite is 4 and the adjacent is 3. If it's this angle, the alpha, opposite is 3, adjacent is 4. So that's what they're showing you in this chart, is how everything's kind of flip-flopped depending on which angle we're looking at. So again, they're going to go through and show you how to actually solve and find missing pieces based on what you have. And I've got several examples here in my slides. And that's going to be the basis of chapter 13. Then chapter 14 moves on and starts talking about some other things related to trigonometry, things like vectors versus scalars, how to use vectors, and some of these things we've already learned about, sine, cosine, and tangent, to find the different components of a vector. They're going to talk a little bit about amplitude, period, phase shift. All of this has to do with more complexity when it comes to these trig functions. Notice these all have those sine, cosine stuff in there, but we've done some other things to it. We've either multiplied it by 4, we've multiplied the angle by a half, all kinds of different things. And this is going to just show you what does that do to the graph? I've included a link right here that kind of gives you a rundown of what this all is about in much easier terms. So I would highly recommend that you use this link when you are going through the material in the book to kind of help simplify things a bit. And then finally, you're going to look at both the law of sines and the law of cosines. And these two laws are used to find missing pieces of triangles, and they don't have to be right triangles. So that's what makes them so special. So make sure you review both the law of sines and the law of cosines so that you can figure out some of these missing pieces of triangles, even if they're not right triangles. So as with everything that you're going through, as you go through the material, if you have problems or questions, please make sure that you reach out to me. Have a great week.